What would you do if your husband met you at the door with a locksmith and a court paper that said the house is his for now? That happened to me the same week he showed our families printed messages I sent to a coworker I said was just a friend. I thought he was overreacting, but he was already 3 steps into a legal plan. I am Eulalie Morland, 33, a dental office receptionist. My husband is Graham Morland, 37, a building inspector. He said the house is his for now, legally. I laughed once at work about feeling young again. I said a coworker's attention made routine feel lighter. Graham heard through friends and started collecting everything I posted. I told everyone he was jealous and controlling, not supportive. They believed me until he showed them my saved messages. Now the court papers sit beside my purse, thick and final. I still insist I only chase joy, never real betrayal. He insists stability matters more than my glow, and wins. This is where my joke ends, and his plan begins. I told myself again and again that Graham was simply overreacting, and that any normal husband would have laughed about a silly workplace comment instead of treating it like treason. At the dental office where I work, joking with patients and coworkers is half the day, and when Evan, the new assistant, teased me about making me feel younger, I played along. I repeated that story at lunch later, adding more sparkle, because I liked the way people looked at me when I made myself the playful heroine. My friends laughed, and I felt alive. And in that moment, Graham's seriousness back home seemed small. When he confronted me about it later that week, asking why his brother told him I had bragged about another man, I brushed it off and said he was insecure. I told him a woman has the right to feel admired, and that he should be proud others found me attractive. He went silent, which irritated me even more, and I told friends he was sulking. At Sunday dinner with his parents, I made a light-hearted comment about how Evan kept everyone at work smiling while Graham stayed serious, and people laughed. Graham did not. His mother frowned and asked quietly if I realized how hurtful that sounded, but I pretended it was harmless. On the drive home, Graham barely spoke, and I said he needed thicker skin. I told myself I was helping him by forcing him to face his dullness, but deep down, I also knew I enjoyed having the upper hand. Each week, I leaned further into the role of the misunderstood wife, sighing to friends that Graham never made me feel young anymore. They nodded, but the sympathy began to fade as he quietly started protecting himself. When he stopped answering questions at family gatherings and left me to carry conversations, I complained he was embarrassing me. I accused him of being distant, even though I knew I had pushed him there. Then came the night I overheard him on the phone with someone speaking in a calm professional tone about records, accounts, and statements. He closed the door when he saw me listening. I demanded to know if he was hiding money, but he said nothing. Instead, he looked at me with cold patience, which unsettled me more than any shouting could. I told my sister he was planning something petty, and she warned me not to push too far, but I laughed it off. I still believed Graham was too soft to truly act against me. I thought silence meant weakness, but with Graham, it became something else entirely, something that unnerved me because it was steady and deliberate. For years, I had trained myself to believe that the person who controlled the conversation controlled the truth, and I had always been that person. I twisted questions back at him, made him feel guilty for even daring to confront me, and he would drop the subject. That cycle had worked so well that I assumed it would last forever. But after my careless joke about Evan making me feel young again, Graham stopped playing his role. He didn't argue, he didn't accuse, and he didn't even try to defend himself. He just listened, nodded sometimes, and then quietly went about his day. At first I told myself that his silence was sulking, childish even, and I rolled my eyes to anyone who would listen. I told Ivy, my sister, that he was insecure and probably worried about losing his grip on me. She laughed and said, "Men always collapse when women shine too brightly." I liked that answer because it made me feel clever instead of reckless. But each time I tried the old tricks on Graham, calling him controlling, accusing him of being jealous, he refused to take the bait. That was when I started to feel something I hadn't felt before: panic. The clinic became my stage. I wore brighter outfits, styled my hair differently, and made sure to laugh loudly when Evan was near. He wasn't serious about me, I knew that, but he was an audience who gave me attention when I wanted it. I told coworkers that Graham never noticed my effort and that I needed to feel alive somehow. They offered half smiles, polite but cautious, as if they knew better than to fully agree. Still, I convinced myself I was justified. At home, Graham asked once why I was staying late again, and I told him I was covering for someone. He just nodded, no argument, and that silence stung worse than words. I told Ivy he was acting paranoid, but even she asked if maybe I was enjoying the line I was crossing. That annoyed me. I snapped at her, saying she didn't understand what it felt like to be invisible in your own marriage. The breaking point came at a neighborhood dinner. I made the mistake of repeating my joke in a louder way, bragging that I still turned heads at work and that certain coworkers reminded me of my younger self. The table chuckled, a few people awkwardly shifting, but I basked in the sound anyway. Graham stared at his glass without speaking. Later that night, as we drove home, he asked nothing. He didn't demand, didn't accuse, just drove with the windows down and the air between us heavy. I felt compelled to fill the silence, so I told him he was too serious and that life was passing him by. He parked in the driveway, got out without a word, and went straight into his study. When I followed him, the door was already locked. That night I checked his desk drawers when he went to shower, and I saw neatly stacked folders labeled with dates. Inside were printed screenshots, copies of my social media posts, even comments from group chats where I had bragged about being admired. My stomach dropped, but I quickly shoved everything back and told myself it was only intimidation. He wouldn't dare use it. Graham was the kind of man who hated drama. He would never bring strangers into our business. That's what I repeated until I could almost believe it. But the proof of his intent came a week later when a formal letter arrived from an attorney named Selkirk. It was worded so politely that at first I didn't grasp its meaning. It referred to preliminary custody considerations, joint finances, and the need for stability for Nora, our daughter. I crumpled it up and threw it across the kitchen. When Graham came home, I demanded an explanation. He didn't argue. He simply said the document spoke for itself. His calmness infuriated me. I told him he was punishing me unfairly, making me out to be unfaithful when I had only wanted harmless attention. He said nothing. I turned to social media, my last weapon. I posted smiling photos with Nora, captions about family love, and hints that Graham had grown cold and distant. At first, a few friends left supportive comments, but then Graham began his own postings. He didn't rant, he simply uploaded screenshots, innocent-looking enough on their own, but framed with quiet explanations about trust, respect, and stability. He didn't even mention my name, but everyone knew. The reaction was swift. People who had laughed with me before grew quiet, and even Ivy stopped liking my posts. Ruth, his mother, told me openly at Sunday lunch that Graham was finally protecting himself and that she stood behind him. I stormed out, furious, but deep down I felt the walls closing in. The next blow landed at the clinic. Dr. Patel called me into her office and explained that a letter had arrived from Graham, professionally requesting clear boundaries with the vendor, Evan. It wasn't accusatory, just formal, but it forced the clinic to schedule a meeting. I was humiliated. I tried to tell colleagues that Graham was controlling and ruining my job, but their eyes told me they were no longer convinced. Even Evan avoided me, his playful banter replaced with quick nods and excuses to leave early. Everywhere I turned, the narrative slipped out of my control. Friends distanced themselves, co-workers whispered, and family split in two. Ruth openly championed Graham, while Ivy grew quiet, no longer defending me. Nora, my daughter, asked why Daddy slept in the guest room now, and I lied, telling her he just needed space. But even she looked at me with confusion, sensing that something much bigger was happening. The final shift came one evening when I returned home late from drinks with co-workers. The locksmith was there, finishing with the front door. Graham stood beside him, calm and polite, holding a document that bore a court stamp. He handed me a copy without speaking. The order granted him temporary possession of the house, along with a custody schedule. I demanded answers, told him he was humiliating me on purpose, but he refused to engage. The locksmith clicked the new deadbolt shut, and Graham walked inside with Nora, leaving me on the porch with nothing but the papers and a box of belongings. That was when I finally understood the depth of his plan. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown a single insult. He had simply gathered the pieces I handed him through my arrogance and built a wall of evidence I couldn't break. The joke that once made me feel clever had become the very rope around my neck, and Graham didn't need to lift a finger to tighten it. I thought I still had the upper hand when Graham moved into the guest room. To me, it meant he was sulking like always, and I told myself it was proof that he couldn't handle a lively wife. I spun that version to Ivy, saying that he was retreating to punish me emotionally. I told co-workers that he was being childish, that he couldn't deal with the fact people at the clinic enjoyed my personality. At first, people gave me polite nods, but I saw the hesitation in their eyes. They were beginning to wonder if maybe Graham had reasons for his silence. At Ruth's Sunday lunch, things escalated. I walked in determined to win support, telling the whole table that Graham had grown distant, that he barely touched me, that he refused to communicate. I wanted to frame myself as a lonely wife stuck with a cold husband. Ruth looked at me directly and said she had warned me before about disrespecting him in public. Her voice was sharp, and she reminded me that marriage required loyalty, not mockery. I argued back, saying she was clinging to outdated ideas of wives being submissive. But Jonah, Graham's brother, didn't defend me either. He sat quietly, stirring his food, and finally said that if Graham was this silent, it must be serious. His tone cut deeper than Ruth's words. I returned home furious and confronted Graham in the kitchen. I told him he was letting his family poison him against me. I said he was making me look weak, and that if he had a problem, he should act like a man and say it. He didn't reply. He just walked upstairs, leaving me fuming. That silence drove me insane because I couldn't twist it into anything. Without his words, I had nothing to manipulate. So I leaned harder on my image outside the home. At the clinic, I laughed louder. I posted more pictures online with captions about freedom, about keeping your sparkle. I made sure Evan was in the background of a few shots, telling myself that would prove I had nothing to hide because it was all out in the open. But when Graham saw them, he didn't explode. He simply started saving the posts, timestamping them. I noticed his cloud drive notifications on our shared email account, and panic rose in my chest. I told myself he was bluffing, but the careful way he was moving scared me. One evening, I overheard him on the phone again, speaking in that same calm professional voice, referencing dates and accounts. I realized then he wasn't bluffing. He was preparing something. I barged into his study demanding answers, accusing him of financial abuse. He didn't shout. He just looked at me once, then closed the door. I stood there shaking, more unnerved by his quiet strength than I had ever been by his anger. When I told Ivy about this, expecting her to defend me, she surprised me. She asked if maybe I had gone too far, if maybe the joke about Evan hadn't been so harmless. Her doubt felt like betrayal. I snapped at her, saying she was siding with him, but the truth was I saw her pulling away too. Even Talia had stopped responding quickly to my texts, her excuses sounding flimsy. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. I saw Graham slip his phone into his pocket when I entered the living room. Later, I checked our shared cloud and saw audio files uploaded with dates from our recent arguments. He had been recording me. He had captured me mocking him, captured me bragging about Evan, captured me dismissing his feelings. I felt sick. I realized all my clever lines, the words I had once thought made me untouchable, were now weapons in his hands. But I couldn't stop myself. Instead of backing down, I doubled down. I told him he was pathetic for collecting evidence. I told him no real man needed proof against his wife. He didn't react. He just stood there silently, as if I had already lost. That silence filled the house like smoke, choking me, reminding me that he had all the pieces and I had nothing. And when he finally handed me a thick manila envelope, marked with Attorney Selkirk's name, I knew the game I had been playing was over. When I think about how far I pushed things, I still tell myself it was not really that serious, but everyone else seemed to think Graham was the victim, and that annoyed me more than anything. At a family dinner in early spring, I made another joke about how Evan, my co-worker, kept me laughing at work, and I casually added that it was nice to feel young around him. The table went silent. Graham stared at his plate, and his sister asked if I realized how cruel I sounded. I rolled my eyes and told her she was overreacting. I insisted Graham never paid me compliments anymore, so someone had to make up the difference, and I pretended I was being brave by saying it aloud. Inside, I loved the discomfort, because discomfort meant control. Later that night, Graham asked why I kept embarrassing him in front of people, and I told him he was paranoid and that no one cared about my harmless jokes. I reminded him that women needed to feel admired and that he should be glad his wife was still attractive to others. He did not argue, which I told myself meant I had won. At work, I leaned even harder into the game, telling Evan little things about Graham being too serious, too boring, too predictable. I loved when Evan smirked because it made me feel like I had a secret audience cheering me on. When Graham found one of Evan's casual notes tucked into my planner, he held it up and asked why another man was writing me reminders about meetings. I laughed and told him he was jealous of paper. He said he did not trust the situation, and I told him that trust issues were his problem, not mine. The truth was, I wanted him to stew in doubt, because then I could tell everyone how insecure he was being. My mother asked me gently if maybe I was going too far, but I told her she always excused men's bad behavior, and she went quiet. When Graham started staying late at the office and locking his phone, I pretended to be offended, accusing him of being secretive, but part of me knew he was planning something. Still, I bragged to friends that he would never really leave because he was too passive. When one friend asked what I would do if he actually called me out, I said proudly that he had no evidence and that men like him never fought back. Then, 2 weeks later, I came home to find envelopes on the table, each one neatly labeled. There was a financial statement showing accounts I had never seen, a record of messages between Evan and me printed out, and a letter from a lawyer outlining property rights. My stomach turned because it meant Graham had been quietly collecting every piece of proof while I was laughing at him. I called him dramatic when he walked in, but he calmly told me it was not drama, it was documentation. He said he was tired of being humiliated in public and ignored in private, and he had decided to protect himself. I yelled that he was ruining our marriage over nothing more than office jokes, but he handed me another document that mentioned custody planning. That word made my throat close. I said he was threatening me with my own children, and he replied that he was protecting them from chaos. I accused him of manipulation, but he just stood there in silence, and the silence was worse than shouting. My sister texted me later, saying Graham had spoken to her about needing space and legal clarity. She told me gently that I should take him seriously. I still told myself it was all an act to scare me, but when he moved into the guest room and stopped responding to any of my baiting comments, I felt the ground start to tilt. And the worst part is I cannot admit to anyone that I wanted him to panic, because now it was me feeling the panic. The hearing day arrived faster than my confidence could recover. Graham stood calm beside his lawyer, holding a quiet folder. I told myself calm people win, so I smiled. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and cold coffee and nerves. Inside, they called our names, and my hands trembled. His lawyer laid exhibits neatly on the wooden table. There were screenshots of my captions beside time-stamped late departures. There were call logs, rideshare receipts, and daycare sign-ins. There were HR letters confirming boundary meetings at the clinic. He included audio clips where I mocked him for caution. Hearing my own voice made my stomach twist with heat. I argued the posts were jokes and private feelings. I insisted he was punishing me through cold paperwork. The judge listened without expression and asked procedural questions. Graham answered carefully, never raising his voice or eyebrows. He requested temporary possession to stabilize Nora's school routine. He requested budget controls to ensure bills stayed current. He requested clear exchanges to reduce conflict at pickups. Every request sat on evidence he had gathered patiently. I said my privacy was violated by screenshots and recordings. His lawyer replied that consent existed through shared cloud backups. They referenced our account agreement and device policy logs. I felt outmaneuvered by terms I had never read. The judge asked about Nora and her current schedule. Graham described homework routines, bedtime windows, and morning drop-offs. He produced school emails showing late arrivals after my outings. I wanted to argue, but the timestamps matched everything. My throat tightened when the judge mentioned temporary orders. The words sounded like steel sliding into place. Exclusive possession for him until mediation was scheduled. A budget freeze limiting non-essential spending went into effect. A custody schedule placed school nights mostly with Graham. Weekends alternated evenly, with holidays rotating by year. The clerk summarized deadlines for disclosures and mediation dates. I walked out stunned while Graham thanked his lawyer. Outside, Ruth hugged Nora and spoke to me carefully. She said order would help our daughter breathe again. I told myself she enjoyed seeing me finally humbled. Back home, the house felt unfamiliar despite familiar furniture. Graham forwarded a clean spreadsheet detailing shared monthly obligations. He added notes explaining due dates and account numbers. I accused him of withholding funds to control me. He replied through email that protection was not punishment. He suggested using a shared calendar for exchanges and appointments. I sent 3 long messages demanding warmth over spreadsheets. He answered once, attaching the court order again. I went online searching for sympathy and easy validation. His latest post showed Nora painting birdhouses with him. He wrote calmly about routines and gentle weekend projects. Comments praised his grace and encouraged him to continue. I posted a selfie and received thin, polite hearts. A friend messaged privately suggesting I get legal counsel. I told her truth did not need paid help. She stopped replying, and I felt suddenly very small. At night, I replayed the audio where I laughed. Hearing it beside paperwork made the laughter sound cruel. I realized my performances had been rehearsals for consequences. Graham never needed anger. He needed only careful receipts. The plan moved forward without noise and without mercy. I stood inside it, shrinking, yet still blaming gravity. Morning arrived with the locksmith before I finished my coffee. The temporary order moved from paper into metal and code. Graham stood calm while the technician explained settings and backups. I told myself it looked theatrical, not permanent or serious. Ruth took Nora to the park to avoid heavy scenes. The street felt colder, even with sunlight across our steps. Neighbors pretended to water plants while watching everything unfold quietly. I told myself their interest proved I still commanded attention. The technician tested the keypad and said access was restricted. Graham nodded and handed me a sealed envelope without comment. Inside, I found the finalized schedule and possession instructions. There was a color calendar for exchanges and holidays. Budget notes listed due dates, categories, and permitted transfers. I felt managed by columns more than yelled at. He preferred numbers because numbers never argued or apologized dramatically. I tried asking about revising the pickup times for Nora. He pointed to the page where flexibility required mutual emails first. His lawyer's signature sat beside his careful initials everywhere. My chest tightened, and I blamed the ink for constriction. I carried a box of clothes to my car trunk. The hinges squeaked like they also wanted to argue loudly. Ivy texted that I could stay a few nights. She added that compliance would help me regain limited control soon. I read compliance twice and felt smaller inside the driveway. At the clinic, HR confirmed my reduced vendor interactions indefinitely. They referenced Graham's letters and our meeting notes professionally, almost kindly. I understood kindness can carry a sentence better than anger. I messaged Evan and received a neutral thumbs-up reaction only. Attention once felt endless, until evidence required silence from everyone. After lunch, my card declined at the pharmacy without warning. The bank representative referenced the court order calmly and efficiently. She said essential categories were funded and others were restricted. I said the restrictions felt like punishment disguised as prudence. She said prudence protected children when households entered transition seasons. I hung up and realized the word transition meant consequences. That evening, Graham posted a short message about following orders. He thanked friends for space and asked for respect around Nora. Comments praised steadiness and urged everyone to avoid speculation online. I uploaded nothing and watched the silence swallow my page. The first exchange happened in Ruth's driveway at dusk. Nora ran to me carefully, checking everyone's expressions first. I told her the week would include art class and pancakes. She asked whether Dad would still help with spelling practice. I said he would handle homework on school nights. She nodded like small adults nod when storms continue. I felt anger rising and reached for an old tactic. I almost said her father was punishing me unfairly today. I stopped because Ruth watched with protective, measured patience. Ruth said Nora's bag needed a signed form for Friday. Graham handed a folder and reminded me of morning traffic. I said the route near the bridge sometimes stalled without warning. He said the alternate route worked better with construction delays. We never raised voices. The documents spoke for both. I tried one last appeal about keys and shared space. He said exclusive possession remained until mediation concluded formally. I said I could at least keep a garage fob. He said the order did not allow shared electronic access. Ruth squeezed Nora's shoulder and said routines build safety nightly. The locksmith arrived again to finish the garage keypad. I watched the numbers change and felt erased by digits. Ivy messaged asking whether I wanted tea at her place. I said later, because finishing meant admitting the finish line. The porch light clicked on as the evening finally settled. Graham placed a printed checklist on the entry table carefully. It listed remaining items and a window for retrieval tomorrow. I recognized my handwriting on several labels he preserved respectfully. He stepped back without meeting my eyes very long. I said I never meant anything to become this loud. He said outcomes care nothing about the volume of beginnings. Nora waved softly and asked about Saturday's museum plan. I said the plan stayed exactly where the calendar showed. Graham reset the code and tested the bolt twice. The door closed with a clean swallow of hallway air. I stood outside holding papers that arranged my own story. The lock was calm, precise, and entirely within the law. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching.